Meet Alina. It's 9:42 p.m. The glow of her laptop reflects off the microwave door as she stands reheating her dinner for a third time. She promised her husband she'd be done by 7. Again, she didn't keep her promise. Alina is the director of operations at a fast-growing consulting firm in Boston. Trusted, smart, relentless. But behind the polished decks and the late-night emails, Alina's quietly falling apart. Her boss micromanages every detail. Slack messages, calendar changes, even word choices in her emails. Feedback is constant. Support is rare. Her boss calls it raising the bar. She calls it exhausting. She wants to say something, but she doesn't want to be labeled as difficult. So she absorbs it. She puts her head down. She pushes through. But her team has no idea that she's barely sleeping, that her back seizes up from the stress, and that she and her husband stopped trying for a baby because there's no space for it. Her calendar is packed, but she feels empty. And the more she accomplishes, the more disconnected she feels. She used to love her work. Now, she just survives it. Today, I'm speaking with Anne Grady, best-selling author, TEDx speaker, and expert on how to build resilient leaders and teams. Through her work in neuroscience, emotional intelligence, and human performance, she helps people like Alina reset, recharge, and reclaim their energy from burnout. And I look forward to hearing how Anne would help someone like Alina, someone who has spent years trying to prove herself, to only realize that resilience isn't about just pushing through, it's about knowing when to pause and how to reclaim your energy, and why well-being isn't just a luxury, it's a necessity. My name is Jay Abbasi, and welcome to Unstuck. Real people, real stories, real solutions. While the details are changed to protect anonymity, what you just heard is based on a true story of challenges that come up in the real world. And we discuss how to navigate these environments with practical tips to help you get unstuck and build a more fulfilling, impactful, and balanced life and career. So Anne, we're going to get into Alina's story here in a bit, but I think that you have an interesting story of what you went through and what led you down the work that you do now and the books that you've written since. So maybe take me back there and what happened in your personal struggles that led you into having a passion for the things that you talk about and you write about now?
Well, so my entire goal growing up was I wanted to be a speaker. I wanted to be a trainer. So it's something I always wanted to do, but my master's was in organizational communication. So I worked with leaders and teams around areas like influence and communication and emotional intelligence. But then I had my son, Evan, and right away I knew something wasn't right. I took him to multiple doctors. Everyone said something was wrong, but they couldn't put their finger on it. And Evan just kept really escalating. His father left when he was 18 months old. And so I have this baby who's crying 20 hours a day. He's angry. He's, really getting increasingly aggressive. And when Evan was 3 years old, he tried to kill me. By the time he was 4, he was on his first antipsychotic. So we started down this journey of really trying to figure out what was wrong with Evan. And when he was 7 years old, he was placed in his first pediatric psych hospital. At 10 years old, he was in his second, and I was diagnosed with a tumor in my salivary gland. And it resulted in complete facial paralysis on the right side of my face, which led to a scratched cornea, which led to needing a gold weight implanted into my eyelid and my bottom eyelid stitched up before I needed to start 6 weeks of radiation. And while waiting for the surgery on my eye, fell down a flight of stairs, breaking my foot in 4 places. So This is hard-won knowledge. It's, when people say, what does it take to be an expert in resilience? Well, you go through the trenches just like everybody else. But it was really my journey with my son who helped me understand that, yeah, really hard stuff happens. But we have a choice when we get on the other side. It's called post-traumatic growth. We can either let it defeat us and we become the victim and things happen to us, or we figure out, how do I use this discomfort? How do I use this struggle as a catalyst to get better and stronger? And I learned that there were some things that I was doing just naturally that were helping my resilience, and there were things that I was doing that were really hindering it. And so I became super fascinated by the brain and learning that we can practice skills and behaviors and convert them into habits to build a really strong resilience buffer so that when stuff happens, which we know it will, we can bounce back better.
Mm. What did you notice was hindering it? What did you find, or maybe it was more in reflection back of
Yeah.
when I was committing to these behaviors, or I was doing this or not doing that, it was keeping me in that victim mindset.
So it's interesting because the story you shared with me for our discussion today about Alina was the problem. I was chronically in a state of busy, and I equated my personal worth with my accomplishment. So I've always been goal oriented, and it's going from one thing to the next to the next. And when people say rest, I was like, yeah, I'll sleep when I'm dead. But what I learned is that that's not the way your brain and body work. And if you don't take time to actively repair them and give them a break, then you'll end up running on fumes. It's a treadmill to burnout or worse, heart disease, high blood pressure, dementia, Alzheimer's, a million different things happen. And what I also learned, though, through this is that short bursts of stress are really good for you and improve every measure of performance. So if you're stressed and it's the end of a quarter and it's crunch time and you're really trying to knock it out, well, that improves your mood, your memory, your motivation, even your immune system. It's chronic busyness and chronic stress that become the problem. So that was probably my biggest lesson learned, that sometimes the best way to move forward is to stop and be still.
Yeah. So I like the way you frame that. It's not so binary. In other words, it isn't as though all stress is bad and we need to avoid it. It's recognizing the appropriate amount of stress that challenges us, but then doesn't lead to the chronic stress.
Yeah, so our brain takes any repeated pattern and converts it into a cognitive shortcut. That's all a habit is. Over half of our day happens on autopilot. But stress can easily become a habit, and so can busyness. Like hurry can become a habit. So if you're chronically running from one thing to the next and you're always feeling stressed, your nervous system and your brain will default to that place if you're not deliberate about changing it. And so many of us end up feeling helpless. Like, I guess this is just what life is. I'm just, I hit the ground running on Monday and I hold out for the weekend and I spend my weekend doing everything I didn't have time to do during the week. And then I just repeat this minus vacations and holidays until I retire or die. Just is what it is. And that's not what life should be, nor does it have to be. You can still be high performing, high achieving, really smart, really, get it together. But you can also do that while you're giving your brain and body time to actively rest.
Yeah. So what was, I guess, the instance where you woke up to, okay, I got to make some changes? Was there something specific? Like you mentioned a series of
Yeah, I was
challenging
walking
things.
out of my doctor's office and him saying, it's just a lymph node, but we'll send the CAT scan results back. And I called my husband. I got remarried, and I called my husband and I said, hey, just a heads up, there's a chance. And before we even knew that it really was a tumor, we sat down and had a really long, hard talk about what success should look like instead of what I'd been defining it as. So for me, I really went from like, everything has to be, I still am a recovering perfectionist. And as Brene Brown would say, an aspiring good enoughist. But I also learned that without rest, none of that other stuff matters. And so, when I was reading Alina's story, one of the first things I thought of was your resume and your eulogy should not be the same document. Right? I've lost people that I love last year, and no one stood at their graveside and talked about how many hours a week they worked or their newest promotion or whether they were the director of this or the chief of that. Right. And so I think sometimes we have been conditioned from the time we're very young that busyness equals productivity and activity equals accomplishment. And it's a trap. And if we're not careful about stepping out of it, we shrink instead of grow.
Hmm. So you said that you are still
Mhm.
working through the tendency, as I am.
Yep.
I'm a
Yep.
recovering people pleaser, recovering perfectionist, many
Yep.
things.
Yes.
So
Yes. Yes.
what do you feel is the way, and what do you do regularly to be able to ensure that you're not falling too deep into that spiral? Are there some small changes that you, or small routines, habits, practices, something that helps you to be able to recognize it and avoid it becoming something that's too chronic?
Yeah, so I created a framework that I really live by, and it's your mindset, your skill set, and your ability to reset. So, your mindset is recognizing your brain is awesome if all you have to do is stay alive. But if you want to be happy, your brain is actually working against you. So, the mindset component, and I'm happy to walk through these skills with you, but the mindset component is really training your brain to work for you rather than against you. The skill set is really making specific activities a habit because those activities have been proven to build resilience and reduce stress. And these are anything from practicing self care, which is not a bubble bath, it's like a boundary, but
Yeah.
practicing self care, anytime you are cultivating positive emotions, gratitude, optimism, humor, laughter, any of those things, your brain knows you're safe. So the skill set are really actionable things you can do every day. And then the reset was the most powerful thing for me. And it was learning to manipulate my stress response in my nervous system because I didn't even know that was a thing. Like I would try to think my way out of stress and anxiety. And unfortunately, when you're stuck in that loop, thinking your way out of it only makes it worse. So I'm happy to walk through some specific strategies, but really from each of those, I found ways to shift the way my brain was navigating adversity, change, and challenge. I found skills that I could practice regularly, and I don't practice all of them perfectly. I'm a work in progress, just like everybody else. But also that you can intentionally use your nervous system to shift your stress response on demand. And it's a habit. So once you learn to do it, it gets easier.
Yeah. I think the idea of training your brain is one that people just don't even think about. How
No.
do I train my brain? Right? It's more of, oh, this is my brain, and I have to just live with this brain,
Mhm.
and there's nothing I can do about it. There's a bit of resignation,
Yeah.
and that it's not even something that's a faculty. When we know from neuroscience, we know from research that anyone can train their brain. So you mentioned these three: mindset, skill set, reset. Maybe we can go into a little of each one if you don't mind. So
No,
tell me a
no.
little bit about mindset. What are some ways in which people can train their brain to optimize their mindset?
So the first is recognizing we all have a narrative. We're talking to ourselves all of the time and we listen to ourselves and we say things like, I'm so busy, I'm so overwhelmed, I'm so stressed. Or if I tell my boss I can't do something, then I'm going to be perceived as difficult. Or if I don't help with this, then my friends are going to think I don't care. And so we have these stories that we never stop to ask ourselves, is that story true? And more importantly, is that story serving me? So I used to tell myself how unfair my life was. And while that's true, it's not a helpful story. So when I started digging into the literature on neuroscience, what's interesting, I was diagnosed with clinical depression at the age of 19. So the irony of a depressed motivational speaker is not lost on me, but I have a neuroatypical brain, so I have to work harder at this than somebody who's got a neurotypical brain. And so the hardest part for me, when people say use positive affirmations or shift your story from negative to positive, that doesn't work for somebody who's got a brain like mine. In fact, positive affirmations for someone who doesn't believe them actually has the opposite of the intended effect, and it makes you feel even crappier. So, what was powerful for me in the mindset is two things. One, to learn that you can shift from negative to neutral. And that's way more believable and it's way better for you. So, if you're already at neutral, like it is what it is, then you can go to it's going to be great. But if you're at I can't do this anymore, it's not fair, I'm so stressed, I'm so overwhelmed, and you go from that to all I can do is all I can do, or I'm going to take it one step at a time, or I'll figure it out, or it is what it is. Going from negative to neutral and writing that down. I have sticky notes all over my house that say these things because out of sight, out of mind. But the other mindset hack that was really powerful for me I learned from Sean Aker, who's an author and a speaker and happiness researcher. And he basically explains that your brain is the weakest cognitively speaking the first 30 minutes you wake up and the last 30 minutes you're awake. So in that window, you have the least ability to prioritize information, put it in context, understand the deeper meaning. And most of us are guilty of waking up and going right to our phone. And we check our email and we watch the news and we scroll through social. And we already have a built-in negativity bias. Just it's part of being human. Your brain is designed to pay more attention to the potential threats than the good stuff. If you're walking through a field with flowers and a tiger jumps out at you, your brain's not like, oh, these are beautiful flowers. It's focused on the tiger. And this makes us way more prone to focus on what's wrong than what's right. And every time we start our day with negative stimulus, email, social, news, it's like flipping on that negativity bias light switch. So without even realizing it, we're scanning our day for everything that's wrong, all the reasons people annoy us, all the little things that drive us crazy. So your mindset is really understanding what you say to yourself literally drives your stress response. It changes the way your body behaves. And there's lots of research to back that up. I mean, something as powerful as they took a group of housekeepers, room attendants at 7 major hotel chains. They find a large group that don't exercise. Those become the study participants. They tell everybody, go about your cleaning duties as normal. Don't change what you're doing. If you don't exercise, don't start. But half of the group was shown an infographic that explained that when you're cleaning a room, you're burning calories. And it assigned calorie burn to each of their different tasks, like changing linens and dusting them. Now, nobody changed behavior, but at the end, the people who learned that what they were doing counted as exercise lost weight, body mass index, lowered blood pressure, increased pain tolerance. And they've repeated this study in a variety of different ways. And every single time, it comes out the same way. What you think drives your biology.
Wow.
And your thoughts are very powerful. So we have to stop listening to ourselves and we have to start talking to ourselves in a way that's going to serve us.
And I want to be sure I understood the study. Okay. These two groups were doing the same activity physically.
Yeah.
Is that accurate?
Yes.
Doing the same activity. One group just believed that it was going to help them to lose weight. The other group did not have that same thought process in regards to the activity. The group that had the infographic physically lost weight. We're healthier than the group that didn't have that infographic.
Yes. And they've done research where even just watching a 10-minute tutorial about stress being good for you versus stress being bad for you changes your cortisol levels and stress hormones in your bloodstream. So just thinking that stress can help you improve performance helps your heart function more effectively. It improves immune function, digestion, metabolism, respiratory health. When you think stress is bad for you and you're in a stressful situation, it has the opposite effect. So just shifting your story about what you're experiencing. Like for me, when I'm like really overwhelmed, I'm like, okay, my body's preparing me. My shoulders are my earrings. My stomach is my armor. Like I'm ready to do this. You just have to teach your brain that emails aren't saber-toothed tigers.
Yeah. I've heard many of the other studies. I think the Kelly McGonigal work, right, and Alina
Exactly.
Crumb's research really speaks to the perception we have of stress. I've never heard the one about the housekeepers. That blows my mind.
I know.
That you have it has such a physical effect on us when we just are primed to believe that some activity will lead to one certain result. I tell people sometimes my example of this, which is I'll start my day and I'll look at my calendar and I'll see I'll have 10, 12 meetings on the calendar. And I feel that, what I used to label anxiety come up in my chest, right? And I feel it. And I tell myself, similar to what you do, I say, this is my body's way of preparing me to meet with this many people and to be at my very best for every single person that I have on my calendar today.
Yeah, exactly. And just because anxiety feels bad doesn't mean it is bad. It's just kind of like having a dog that barks when people walk by your house. It's just an internal alarm system going, pay attention. Now, when it becomes chronic and you can't stop it and it starts hurting your relationships and your productivity and your performance, that's when it's an issue. But everybody has some level of anxiety. It's a normal adaptive human response.
That's amazing. Okay, so there were the three. There was mindset.
So that's mindset. Skill set. Yeah, these are things that you can do regularly. So one, make time for what matters, right? If I tracked your time for a week, would I be able to tell what is most important to you? right? So yes, your job is super important, but it's not your identity. And so it's really important to take time each week. And I'll tell you how to get a self-care sheet at the end, which is 6 categories of your life to maintain focus on. But it's really being deliberate about setting a goal each week to give one area of your life a little more focus than the others. And obviously, this is not written in stone, but it's meant to say, all right, how do I give my family the extra time they need this week? Or how do I give my health the extra time, or my brain? But other things, like I had no idea that gratitude had so many health benefits. When I had facial paralysis, I asked my doctor, should I do exercises, physical therapy? Like, how do I get my face to come back? And he said, start a gratitude practice. And me being me, I was like, it's not going to work. What am I grateful for? Like half my face. I don't have time to write a gratitude journal. And he's like, do you brush your teeth? And I said, yes, twice a day, every day. And he said, good. Think of 3 things you're grateful for and why you're grateful for them while you brush your teeth. And it has been such a game. I credit it with my face coming back. They said my face probably wouldn't recover. I credit a gratitude practice with it.
Wow.
But the interesting thing about gratitude that most people miss is it's not enough to just download the experience. You have to install it. And that means you have to sit in that good feeling for 15 to 20 seconds. It's called savoring. So if you see me at a grocery store where I get rock star parking, I am like high-fiving myself in the car. Like, you go, girl, you got this. You're lucky. Good things happen to you. And the other part of gratitude is the because. I'm grateful for blank because. When you have to really dissect it, you really internalize it, and it shifts the way your brain responds. So you can train your brain to offset the negativity bias by looking for what's right intentionally. So gratitude also has incredible health benefits. I mean, mood, all of those things, but sleep, blood pressure, heart function, heart rate variability, kidneys, liver, hormones. I mean, the list just goes on and on. But the other skill set that was really surprising to me is anytime you are cultivating positive emotions on purpose, your brain knows you're safe. And your brain can't tell the difference between an email or a tiger, but it also can't tell the difference between real or perceived safety. So anytime you are laughing or connecting with friends, which are the number one predictor of your health and how long you will live, your friends are your number one predictor of your happiness and health. So that was another important lesson to me. I was so achievement oriented that when my friends were like, let's hang out, I was like, no, I'm working on the book, or no, I got this with Evan. And I didn't make it the priority that it needed to be. So the skill set is really cultivating positive emotions, making time for the things that matter. And then the reset is really manipulating your nervous system. We're in a state, our autonomic nervous system's job is to regulate stress in the face of danger. And so to do that, it's either in a state of activation or relaxation, and it can't do both at the same time. So the more often it's in a state of activation, the easier it is for it to stay there. And we learned this when Evan was 15 years old. We had to make a really gut-wrenching decision. He was no longer safe at home. We were no longer safe with him home. And we live in Texas, which has the least mental health benefits of any state in the country. And so we were tasked with having to find a program for him. And the one we found was in Idaho. And so we took him to Idaho, and then I had to fly out and go to Europe and do a book tour and a speaking engagement. And it was horrible. And I came home and I could not relax. Like, I literally couldn't take a deep breath. And what I learned is that my nervous system had been so activated for so long, I had to retrain it. And it took about 6 months for me to just start getting in a daily habit of doing that. But when you're trying not to feel stressed or worried or anxious, you feel more stressed, worried, and anxious. And the reason for that is you can't interrupt something that's happening in your body with your brain. So 80% of the input that you get from the world around you starts in your body and then travels up to your brain, not the other way around. So when you start to feel the physical tension or physical tightness, or your hands are clammy, any sensation, you're more apt to interrupt the loop if you go from the bottom up, meaning pay attention to how you are feeling and where you are feeling it in your body. And I know that to me, that sounded foreign. Like, people are like, practice mindfulness. And I'm not sitting in a full lotus, eating tofu, finding my zen. I don't have time for that. That's not what mindfulness is at all. It's just training your brain to be where you are when you're there. Because one, your brain knows it's safe when you do that. But two, when you get used to reading your nervous system, like what is the emotion I'm feeling? Where in my body do I feel it? You get really good at interrupting the anxiety loop. So that's the first part of it. But then we spend half of our time being somewhere other than where we are. And depression is linked to being stuck in the past. Anxiety is linked to being stuck in the future. Mindfulness teaches you to come back to now. And so one way I practice that is like a technique called cognitive shuffling. So at night when I'm trying to go to sleep and my brain is reminding me of all these things I should have done or didn't get done or should have said or did say and shouldn't have, you give your brain a task that is simple enough to keep you not from falling asleep, simple enough so you don't stay awake, but complex enough and difficult enough to keep you from ruminating and worrying. So like I use the alphabet for everything. Think of animals that start with every letter of the alphabet. And I'll be like aardvark, anteater, antelope, and I'll keep going. Then my brain will be like, "Oh, you forgot to send this email," and then I'm like, "That's okay, bunny, rabbit," and like, "Okay, now you shouldn't have had that donut. That's okay, cat, cougar," and I get the zebra, and sometimes I have to start over. But that's mindfulness. You're training your brain. That's meditation, right? You're training your brain to go where you want it to go, and the more often you do that, the more you are able to regulate emotion, maintain attention and focus. Just the benefits go on and on. So yeah, you can manipulate your nervous system on demand. And the simplest way, quite frankly, is taking 3 deep diaphragmatic breaths, extending the exhale twice as long as the inhale.
Yeah.
When we're stressed, we breathe from our shoulders. Our brain doesn't get enough blood and oxygen. So 3 really deep belly breaths with a long, slow, extended exhale start to reset your relaxation response.
Yeah. I've never heard that mental exercise of really focusing on, for example, the first letter of an animal,
Yeah.
but that makes total sense.
Yeah.
It's just a clever way to keep your mind engaged on an activity where you're focusing on the present moment
Mhm.
and not allowing for the rumination to
Exactly.
occur. And I agree with you. I think that the physical body, being able to bring your attention into the physical body, is the way through when anxiety or fears feel like they're gripping you. It's just to become very familiar with those sensations.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing that comes to my mind, similar to what you're saying, is that the mind wants to try to fix it,
Uh-huh.
right? And so when you go into the body, it's not about I'm doing this so I can fix it, right?
That is
It's
such
like,
a great point.
yeah,
That is such a great point. I think most of us are like, how do I make it stop? And the goal is not to make it stop. The goal is to change your relationship with it, right?
yeah,
It's telling you something. And so but the other thing is like, so people think I'm crazy because I'd rather speak on stage in front of 20,000 people than go to a cocktail networking reception before or after the speaking event. And people are like, how in the world is that a thing? And I'm like, well, it makes me anxious. Small talk makes me anxious. So what I did for years is I avoided those. Oh, I'm flying in too late. Oh, I'm getting in too early. Like, I just can't do that. But what I learned is that when you avoid a situation that makes you anxious, you're training your brain that it really is dangerous, making you more anxious the next time you're in that situation. So if you're one of those people who like goes to a networking event and then you sit there scrolling on your phone so you look busy, you're telling your brain, I'm in danger. Don't let me do anything like this again because it's going to kill me. And so when you avoid the feeling, you prolong it. You got to sit in the
mm,
suck, hug your monster, get comfortable being uncomfortable. And intense emotions only last about 90 seconds anyway. So you just have to ride the wave and then let it pass. After 90 seconds, it's our thoughts that drive it.
yeah. Sit in the suck. I like. I never heard it said that way. I like that a lot. Yeah. Or sit. I had a mentor once say, "Sit in your soup." Sit in the soup.
Sit in your soup. Yeah.
Yeah, sit
You
in
don't
your
have to
soup.
marinate in it. You don't have to bathe in it, but you have to give yourself permission to feel it.
Yeah, permission to feel it. And with just to touch on a little bit of Alina's story, because I think so much of what we're talking about here is what she's experiencing and how
Mhm.
she deals with the pressure, how she's dealing with, let's say, a manager who's pretty much micromanaging at this point. One thing she's really struggling with is setting boundaries, and I know that you've written about that. You talk a lot about that. How would you help someone like Alina to be able to take that first step and being more committed to setting boundaries?
Well, so first, a boundary is not a wall, it's a guardrail. right? So you can say, I don't work on weekends. Does that mean you'll never ever have to work on a weekend? Of course not, right? Stuff happens. So I think sometimes we set them and make them so rigid. So there's two kind of boundaries. There's the ones you have with yourself, and then there's the ones you have with other people. And often the ones we have with ourselves are the ones that we break first. So, meaning like, I'm going to keep my phone in the other room for an hour and give my brain time to rest and not touch my phone, or I'm not going to sleep with it on my night table because then I check it when I wake up in the middle of the night. Like, that's a personal boundary and they're really important. But your work boundaries are what your yeses and nos are made of. And nobody wants to be the person who's like, nope, can't help with that, and not be the team player. So, there's a couple of techniques I recommend. One is, if you tell someone what's not okay, you have to tell them what's okay instead. Right? It's not okay to email me at midnight and expect an immediate response, but it is totally okay to email me at midnight as long as we have the understanding that I don't need to respond until I'm on in the morning. Right? So
Yeah.
boundary is like, this is not okay, but here's what to do instead. Because people don't often know, we assume they should just know better, but it doesn't always work. But the other that I was thinking of with Alina in particular is something called a high payoff activity discussion. So you've probably heard of the 80-20 rule. 20% of X generates 80% of Y. Well, 20% of the tasks you do any given day generate 80% of your results. They're called your high payoff activities. The problem is most of us get sucked into either the easier tasks that are just the busy work, or the ones that we like. And so, what I recommend is thinking, and when I started my business, this is really the process I went through because I was trying to figure out why I wasn't making any money. So, I went through this exercise, and it's like, what are the top handful of things you do in your job that generate the greatest return for the time invested? And the higher you go in the organization, the broader these become. So, if I'm an individual contributor, it might be my own training and development, might be one. If I'm a CEO, it might be staff engagement or staff development. But what you do is you write down. So let's say Alina, let's say I'm Alina's manager, right? And I'm giving her feedback on everything and I'm overwhelming her and I'm not giving her a lot of praise. I'm just like, this needs to get done and this needs to get done and this needs to get done. So what I would suggest is Alina writes down what she thinks her top 5 high payoff activities are. As her boss, I write down what I think they should be, and we're going to compare our list. And one of 3 things is going to happen. Either one, we're in alignment, great. 2, we're not in alignment, important conversation, but it does something even more beautiful. The next time I go to Alina and I'm like, hey, I need you to take this on, she can say, absolutely. Let's sync up so we can reprioritize what's on my plate to make room for it.
Yeah.
That's a boundary. That's saying like, yes, I'm happy to do what you need me to do as long as you're part of helping reprioritize the schedule. Right.
Yeah. I appreciate that you're touching on how you socialize it. Because I think that oftentimes people just don't know how to socialize it. They don't know how to get somebody else aligned with the boundary. Because in their mind, it's kind of binary. It's like either I don't have any boundaries or I set it and it's now something where I'm kind of defensive to the other person, right? Where we're almost combative in a way where my boundary somehow is telling them, no, I'm not doing that anymore, and too bad for you, right?
Right. And I think that's the thing. We tend to think boundaries are these like rigid structures. And really, for example, if I've got a manager who's constantly giving me feedback, I want to ask the managers, help me understand. And that's a great question to lower defensiveness, by the way. Can you help me understand? So can you help me understand can you help me understand why you provide the feedback that you do, or how you provide the feedback the way you provide it? Help me understand what your goal is. Can you help me understand your goal? And then if they're like, well, I just want to make sure we're constantly getting better and pushing and, giving feedback regularly, say, you know what? Feedback is so helpful for me. I truly appreciate it. What would be most impactful is if we could meet once a week and we can discuss what you think went well and where you think I have some room for improvement. And that way I can make sure I'm keeping a record of it and I can set goals and work on it. So it's like, okay, great. Give me feedback, but just do it in a way that's not a fire hose. So I'm always defensive.
Yeah. And that's also a really skillful way to coach up.
Yeah.
what you're saying, right? To lead upwards and to be able to, because I think too often what we think is, well, the manager is in this position because they're supposed to have everything figured out and aren't going to be able to, or aren't going to make any mistakes. And that's not true. They're humans. And therefore, very often we need to have the courage to
Yeah.
coach them,
Yeah.
and in a way that is still respectful, though. It isn't like you're completely criticizing everything they're doing either.
One of the things I tell people is in a job interview, ask the hiring manager, would it be helpful to share with you the best way to lead me?
I like that a lot.
Because then you're saying like, here's what works, here's what doesn't. If you want to see really great performance from me, here's what I need to do that. When these things happen, it's really hard for me. So you're kind of giving them the playbook. Now, if you have someone in the interview who's like, I lead everyone the same way, run. That is not a job you want, because our
Yeah.
immediate supervisor is the one who determines our job satisfaction more than any other factor. So if you've got a leader who's interviewing you for a job, I'd always ask to talk to the hiring manager in an interview process. But if you've got someone who's like, well, I mean, that's great. I like that you like to tell me how you want to be led, but we'll discuss that later. Run, run, run,
Yeah.
run.
You're right. You're right. I think also why I like that question a lot is it showcases your self-awareness,
Yes,
right? To be
exactly.
able to say,
Exactly.
I'm motivated by this kind of leadership. I will respond well when you're behaving this way. It
Mhm.
says, hey, I've given this a lot of thought. I've done this kind
Yeah,
of reflection and
sure.
this introspection on what really drives my behavior. So with someone like Alina, there's a lot of things that she could work on. So she let's say, okay, she sets that boundary, and then there are some, clearly there are things that are she's not doing that she needs to start doing. How do you start with someone? Like how do you get them to be able to recognize, well, okay, you need to be able to do these kind of things in order to take care of yourself. You can't impose that on them, right? So
Yeah.
what would be the kind of process you would walk someone like Alina through to be able to reorient her life?
So if I'm using my own framework, then I would say, okay, so you mentioned that you don't feel comfortable telling your boss you're overwhelmed, or feel comfortable telling your team that you've got back issues, or you're not having a baby because you feel like you just don't have time. Um, so, for example, let's say in the story you said she doesn't like to get she doesn't want to speak up in meetings or criticize her manager or something, because she doesn't want him to think she's a problem child or difficult,
Right,
right?
right.
So is that true? Like, has your manager in the past, when you spoke up, said you're difficult? Because if not, it's a story you're telling yourself. And so the first question I'd ask is that story serving you? Do you think you have, like, one of Alina's characteristics is she's go, 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 right? Are you equating activity with accomplishment? Are you equating productivity with self-worth? So the first thing is to recognize, like, what are my thoughts doing to either perpetuate this issue or help solve it? And then I would tell her to get a new morning routine if she does email or any of those things in the morning. But then next, it was the skill set. I would say, what are some areas of your life that are really important to you?
Yeah.
Okay, how do you carve out time on your calendar, and those become non-negotiables, right? And then how do you manipulate your stress response? What are you doing? It sounds to me like, a lot of people assume, to your point, that a manager should just know better. I don't have a statistic on this, but I would, based on my work with hundreds of organizations, school districts, government agencies, you name it, I would say 80% of the leaders I meet have been promoted into a management position because they were tenured or a subject matter expert. And that doesn't mean you have the skills needed to lead effectively. So your ability to influence up and communicate what you need in a respectful way is awesome. And one of the things most people don't think about, you can use ChatGPT to help you reframe these things. So you can go into ChatGPT and say, I need to give my manager some feedback about how they're treating me. Here's the issue. Here's what I want to say. How could I say it better? Right. And so you can use AI to go, have you considered framing the conversation like this? And it, obviously, you're not going to go line by line, but you can get some ideas of things you might not otherwise have thought of.
In the end, what we're trying to help someone like Alina do is be able to consider other perspectives,
Yeah,
because the way she's seeing things is very narrow.
reality.
Right. Yeah.
And it's
It's
not
just,
the reality.
right. It's not the reality. And one can even argue there isn't only one reality, because we all have
Right.
subjective
Exactly. That's right.
realities,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Right. But even to your point, the one that she has now isn't serving her. The reality that she's believing in is creating more distress and more harm for her. And so I guess it's really oftentimes about beliefs, isn't it? Because, right, what you were saying before about activity equals accomplishment. This is a belief that she
Mhm.
has.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes with beliefs, they're so ingrained, right? And
Oh,
I
yeah,
mean
they're
that.
so ingrained.
Right. So, like, I think that the questioning of, is that true? Does that serve you, is a wonderful starting point. But you know how beliefs really stay are deep rooted. What is it going to take to change that kind of belief in someone like Alina?
Well, one, I just want to go back to something that we talked about where in her story, she was not talking to her team about how tired she was and how her back was hurting her because she didn't want to complain. So, Amy Edmondson at Harvard coined the term psychological safety, right? It's the number one predictor of high performing teams. Teams who feel safe to show up authentically as themselves have 74% less stress, 62% greater productivity, a 50% decrease in burnout rates. And the way you create safety is your own vulnerability as a leader.
Mm.
Like, you have to make it okay to not be okay and let people have that experience and talk about it. So that's the first thing. But I would say if it's so ingrained, you have to start dissecting the stories you are telling yourself. So I would say pick the biggest pain point that you have and let's dissect some of the things you're telling yourself about that's causing more pain, right?
Mm.
So I have to stay busy. My boss will think I'm lazy if I'm not working at night and on weekends. He'll think I don't deserve the promotion. My team will think I'm not, whatever those stories are, you have to like pull them out. And that's why I said I have sticky notes all over my house with like stories on them, with mantras on them, because it has to become a habit. And your brain doesn't take 60 days or 90 days or 100 days to make a habit. It takes repetition and consistency. And it's easy to revert back to old thought patterns, right? So you have to treat your brain like a job. It is more important than anything else you can do to take care of your brain and your body.
Yeah.
And when we are telling ourselves things that are not serving us, you're creating more cortisol, you're creating more adrenaline, you're having a negative impact. So I would say that's the first, but with a caveat. When you are so overwhelmed and stressed, you don't have time to pause and ask if my story is serving me. So when you are in that stressed state, that's where I tap into my nervous system,
Right.
right? Like, you can't use your brain when you're in a threat state, doesn't work. But you can use your body to shift your brain out of a threat state. So if I have time to process and think, that's where I'm like, okay, how do I shift my story? Like, that cognitive story is not helping me. What would be more helpful? But if I'm in it and I'm in the midst of it, it is all body based. It is
Yeah.
breathing. It is reading my nervous system. It is paying attention to what I'm paying attention to and how I feel about it, not to get rid of the emotion, but to just tell my nervous system it's safe.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm so glad that I asked you that, because there are two major things I can pull from how you responded. The first one is being able to recognize what's the state you're in. And if it's one where you're not really open to other perspectives, go into the body.
Yeah.
Don't even get into those questions yet. I mean, that's something you could reflect on later. And
Yeah.
I also appreciate that you alluded to the fact that this isn't something that's a, hey, I do this once, or I do this even just twice or three times. It has to become, I often use the word obsession, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but I do feel like I'm obsessed. Like, I joke with my fiance about this. I say, like, I am obsessed with my own thought process. I am obsessed with how I respond to things. I am obsessed with my bodily sensations. It is something that I've just reoriented myself to where
But
I'm
not
always
everybody
watching.
has it. So
Right.
it's interesting because you have a lot of metacognition. You think about the way you think. I am very
Yeah.
much the same way. I'm stuck in my head a lot about like how I'm thinking and is that thinking right and blah 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 blah. There are lots of people who don't have that.
Yeah.
And I almost am jealous because it's like, oh, that must be so peaceful up there. So I got a committee telling me all these things, right? So if you're not one of those people who has that, I was speaking with a group last week in Atlanta, and I had someone come up to me and she said, what happens if you don't know you're stressed? Like, I get sick all the time and my doctor says it's stress, but I don't know I'm stressed. And I said, okay, so her brain isn't the one going, I'm so stressed, I'm so overwhelmed. I'm like, well, how do you know you're stressed? oh God, my stomach always hurts. I'm not sleeping well. Like those are her signs. So
Right.
one size doesn't fit all. There is not like if you do A plus B, you will always get C. You have to find that what works for you. That's why anytime someone comes to one of my sessions, I'm like, pick one thing and take it away. And that's what I would say from this podcast. Find
Yeah.
one thing that resonated and go try it for a while. And if it doesn't work, pick something else, right? But there is not a one size fits all approach.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that the lever that we can all pull is the intentionality around self-awareness, but then what ends up being the next lever is going to be different for everybody. Like
Yes.
to be able to then figure out, okay, it's when I'm experiencing this in my stomach or this in my chest, or when I'm, noticing this kind of thought spiral. That's something that I can't tell you and can't tell you. No one can tell you.
Yeah.
You have to figure that out for yourself, right? So let's imagine this scenario, because I always want to imagine that our guests, that you have a chance to meet the person in the story. So let's say Alina goes to one of your sessions and she hears your talk and it's something that really inspires her. She feels like she wants to learn more from you. So she maybe talks to you afterwards. You ask her a little bit more, you hear her story, you understand what she's going through, and you have an opportunity to ask her a question or two, a way to really help her to think about things a bit differently. There are a few things you've already said, but what would be the question that you'd want to bring to Alina to help her to work through her challenges?
I'd probably say, is the way you're working for you?
Mm,
Is what you're doing helpful? Is it working? And if Alina says, no, it's not, okay, well, then we need to figure out how to not repeat it and do the same thing and get stuck on a loop, right? Often we're more comfortable with old problems than new solutions because new solutions require us to be uncomfortable in changing our behavior, right? So my question for Alina would be, if it's not working for you, what's one thing that would have the greatest impact on your physical and mental health right now?
yeah,
And that's the thing I would start focusing on. And I
yeah,
would, so like, for example, there are tons of small things people can do, like sunlight tunes your hormones, recharges your brain, helps your metabolism. Like there's a million different tiny things, like 4 minutes of brisk exercise, anything, 4 minutes of brisk running around the building between meetings, running to the bathroom, that decreases your risk of dying from cancer by over 30%.
wow,
Right? Just standing up once an hour decreases your chances of dying prematurely and improves metabolism and cognitive function. And so I think sometimes we're like, I don't have time to go to a retreat. I don't have time to go to the gym. Okay, integrate one small thing into the routine you already have. Practice gratitude while you brush your teeth. Take deep breaths while you make your coffee. Really start paying attention to what are the things I do every single day just out of habit, and how do I take something that I know will help me and attach it to that?
yeah. I love it, and I love the idea. Just start small, one thing, and it will compound over
Yes.
time. And I want to thank you so much for carving out time out of your
Oh,
day to chat with me. And for anyone listening, I highly recommend checking out Anne's website. It's annegradygroup.com. And then you were sharing with me before we were starting recording, you have a resilience self-assessment tool right on the website. And that's annegradygroup.com/strong. Is that right?
yep.
Yep. So
AnneGradyGroup.com/strong. You'll get a resilient self-assessment. And if you'd like, you can sign up. I send out a weekly Tuesday resilience reset tip, tool, or strategy. I don't sell anything or market anything. It's just there to be a reset in the middle of your week. And it's just AnneGradyGroup.com/strong.
very cool. That's amazing. And thank you so much again. This was wonderful. I appreciate you sharing all your insights and your wisdom with us. This was awesome.
Jay, thank you so much for having me. The pleasure was all mine.
I love having guests like Anne Grady on the show because there's so many things that we have in common, but a different perspective can really light up some thinking for me. It can offer me a different way of processing a strategy or an approach. And Anne did that for me, and I hope she did that for you as well. And I'll do my best to synthesize this down to the 3 insights and 3 actionable takeaways. And the insights, I'm going to go in the 3 categories that she mentioned. The first one was mindset. Train your mind to work for you. Asking yourself questions like, is this true? Is this serving me? Helping move from negative thinking into neutral thinking, and realizing that it's all about the story you're telling yourself. And you do have some power there to decide on what is the story you're telling yourself. And when it comes to any disruptive emotions that might be coming up, the goal isn't to stop them. The goal is to change your relationship with them. Just because something is feeling bad doesn't mean it is bad. So there's so much power in your beliefs. There's so much power in the stories you're telling yourself. So tap into that power and realize that that can even affect your biology, like that research of the people who were cleaning homes. I mean, that was fascinating. Consider you have this superpower. Use it. Second insight, Skillset. Make time for what matters. She referred to gratitude practice, but not just writing out what you're grateful for. You've heard me talk about this, I'm sure. Savoring gratitude. Asking yourself, I'm grateful, or writing out, I'm grateful for this because. And then other things about how your friends are the number one predictor of your longevity and your health and your well-being. That was fascinating. So are you committing time towards that and making it a skill, developing these habits so that they become routine for you? Third insight, reset. Make time to actively repair. Chronic busyness is a trap. We then associate our sense of worth to our productivity, and that's not healthy. So it's wonderful to have goals, but when we are treating our whole lives as though who we are is based on how much we accomplish, we set ourselves up for a lot of discouragement. And I like that she said that your resume and your eulogy should not be the same document. Actionable takeaways. First one, go from the bottom up. I like the way she worded that. When you're dealing with some stress, anxiety, frustration, whatever it is, get into the body first. Maybe start with some breathing, then get familiar with the sensations. What are your signs? And rather than, well, if you do choose to avoid them, you're prolonging it. So give yourself permission to feel whatever comes up. Ride the wave. Second actionable takeaway. If you tell someone what's not okay, tell them what is okay. So setting boundaries isn't only about what you tell someone they can't do, but it's also informing them of what is all right, what is acceptable. And that way you maintain a healthy relationship with this person while setting that clear boundary. Third actionable takeaway. Write down your top 5 highest priority tasks. What of the tasks that you do, what provides the greatest return on investment? Then align with your leaders, sync on those priorities. And if for any reason they attempt to put something else on your plate, go ahead and ask them, well, if these are our top 5 priorities, can you help me understand how we're going to also include this? What do I need to now remove from my plate in order to add this on? And I use that question that she brought up. Can you help me understand? Because in doing this, you align with this person on what are the high priority tasks. And that way they don't just keep piling things on. They recognize something is going to have to go in order to keep adding more to your plate. Join us on Friday's episode. I'm going to dive deeper into neutral thinking. And Trevor Mawad's research, who's a sports psychologist, he works with professional athletes all over the world. His research is fascinating on negative thinking, positive thinking, and neutral thinking. And while we know negative thinking is harmful, I'm going to walk through the surprising negative effects of positive thinking and how you can stay in neutral so you can respond to challenges in the most effective way. So until next time, thank you so much for listening.